Mr. President, I rise today with my friend and colleague, Senator Wyden, to draw attention to the dangerous oil train derailment that occurred in Oregon last Friday, and the urgent need to protect communities around our nation with much stronger safety regulations for these rolling explosion hazards. Now, folks in the Columbia Gorge have experienced a proliferation of trains carrying coal and carrying oil. They've been concerned about the length of the trains and how these trains roll through and divide their communities and the challenge of the coal dust. But there is one concern they've had above everything else, and that's that a train full of explosive Bakken crude would derail in their community. And that happened last Friday. It is the very scenario that communities have dreaded. This oil train was traveling through the Cascade Mountains along the Columbia Gorge on its way to Tacoma, Washington. 97 cars with flammable explosive Bakken crude. 16 tank cars went off the tracks. One car ruptured. When it ruptured, it spewed oil, and the oil created an inferno, and the inferno started to heat up the adjacent cars. And the adjacent cars have pressure relief valves, and as they got hot, they started spewing oil out of these pressure relief valves, and the fire spread to the three cars. And this happened near the town of Mosier, Oregon, just 70 miles east of Portland. Now, we're fortunate. We thank our lucky stars that no one was injured in the incident. But it could have been different. As my colleague from Oregon pointed out, the proximity to Mosier resulted in an evacuation of over 100 nearby residents and a kindergarten through 8th grade school with over 200 children, and an air quality warning for vulnerable residents from the thick plumes of black smoke. We were fortunate, and we are happy that no human life was taken, no injury occurred. Let's take a look at what that inferno appeared like. This massive plume of burning Bakken crude rising into the air. And we see here the fire in the adjacent cars, and we see the proximity to the Columbia River. There could have been a massive release of oil into the Columbia River as well. Again, we were fortunate in this regard. It is a very special place, the Columbia Gorge. But as this narrow channel through the Cascade Mountains occurs, these trains run through the middle of virtually every community along the way. They represent a rolling time bomb, and citizens are right to have grave concerns. I don't think the citizens along the Columbia Gorge are mollified by thinking, well, it could have been worse, we were fortunate this time. Instead, what the citizens in Mosier are thinking, and citizens in communities all along the gorge are thinking, our concerns about these rolling explosion hazards are confirmed, and we need to take serious measures so that one of these trains does not blow up in our community in the future. Now, there are inspections that take place. The track was reportedly inspected on May 31st. A track detector vehicle used lasers and other technology to inspect the track within the last 30 days. But what happened? Why did this occur along this stretch of track? It is reported that a bolt or multiple bolts sheared. Why did they shear? Was it temperature differentials between day and night in our unusually warm spring? Was it because of the weight of these trains rolling through? Was it the volume of the traffic? Was it the speed they were traveling? We have to understand every detail so that we respond and make sure this does not happen again. And that's why it's so disturbing that the National Transportation Safety Board declined to investigate. In its mission, the NTSB is supposed to investigate accidents that result in the release of hazardous materials. Well, that certainly was the case. That involved problems of recurring nature. There have been recurring derailments that involve significant property damage, and there was significant damage here. This derailment sent oil into Mosier's wastewater treatment plant. The plant has been closed down, a major challenge for the city to cope with. There's even been a pause on the drinking water because the oil sheen in the river, the modest oil sheen, was uncertain where it was coming from and whether it would get into the intake for the drinking water. So let's heretofore not have a situation where there is a significant crash and we don't have the investigation to learn everything about it so we can apply those lessons into the future. Now, Senator Wyden has been leading this charge to make sure that we understand accidents, that we have the right set of precautions in place, braking standards on the brakes and speed standards on the tracks, and upgraded railroad tanker cars that are far less likely to rupture. And I thank him for his leadership on this, and I'm a full square partner in this effort. The tank car that ruptured was not one that met the new standards. It was what was referred to by the president of Union Pacific as kind of a medium safety. Not the worst car, not the oldest car, did have some upgrades on it, but certainly not the new car that we've been setting and aspiring to have, that is a stronger car with more protections, minimizing the chance of a rupture. This is an issue we must take on seriously and urgently. Let's recognize that it's one accident after another. In July 2013, a runaway Montreal Main and Atlantic Railway train spilled oil and catch fire inside the town of Lac-Mégantic in Quebec. 47 people were killed, 30 buildings burned in the town center. In December that year, a fire engulfed tank cars loaded with oil on a Burlington Northern Santa Fe train after collision a mile from Castleton, North Dakota. 2,000 residents were evacuated as emergency responders struggled with the intense fire. In January 14, a 122-car Canadian National Railway train derailed in New Brunswick, Canada. 3 cars containing propane, 1 car containing crude from Western Canada exploded after derailment, creating intense fires that burned for days. In April of that year, 15 cars of a crude oil train derailed in Lynchburg, Virginia, near a rail-side eatery and a pedestrian waterfront, sending flames and black smoke into the air, and 30,000 gallons of oil spilled into the James River. In February of 2015, Valentine's Day, a 100-car Canadian National Railway train hauling crude and oil and petroleum distillates derailed in Ontario, Canada. Blaze burned for days. 2 days later, a 109-car CSX oil train derailed and caught fire near Mount Carbon, West Virginia, leaking oil in the Kanawha River tributary and burning a house to its foundation. The blaze burned for a week. In November of last year, a dozen cars loaded with crude oil derailed from a Canadian Pacific Railway train, prompting evacuation of dozens of homes near Watertown, Wisconsin. Let's take a look at this chart. In all, there have been 32 crashes involving oil trains since 2013. So in less than 4 years, 32 crashes. I just highlighted a few of them. We see a massive increase of crude oil by rail, and therefore there's a corresponding concern because of the explosive nature of this product and the derailments resulting in explosions and infernos. So Senator Wyden, and I have been calling for reform, and we're going to keep pressing. We need better information for first responders on the scheduling of these trains. We need better knowledge of where the foam is stored that can be used to respond. We need more foam stored in more places. We need faster implementation of the brake standards and faster implementation of the speed standards and faster implementation of the rail car tanker standards. But we have to understand in every one of these wrecks what happened. Let's take the same diligence to this that we take to aviation. We study every plane crash to understand what went wrong, so we can take those lessons and diminish the odds of it happening again. And the result is we have incredibly safe aviation. Shouldn't we have the same standards when it applies to transportation across America, with trains full of explosive oil running through the middle of our towns, not just in Oregon, but all across this country? Haven't we learned in crash after crash after crash that this is not a one-time isolated incident, but something that happens with considerable regularity? Can't we do more? Yes, we can. Yesterday, when I talked to the president of Union Pacific, I told him we were going to call for a moratorium. And Senator Wyden and Governor Brown, and Representative Blumenauer and Bonamici joined in this effort. And he heard our voice. He understood the challenge to these communities, the concerns that until the mess is cleaned up and until we understand and address the fundamental problems that contributed to this crash, no more oil should roll through the Columbia Gorge. And that is what we have called for, and that is what we're going to keep persisting in. Let us stop this process of having oil train crash after oil train crash, explosion after explosion, inferno after inferno. You know, the damage gone up dramatically as the transportation of this oil has gone up dramatically. Incidents resulted in $30 million in damage last year, up from a fourth of that the previous year. So let's act. Let's act aggressively. Let's act quickly. Senator Wyden's act would take us a powerful stride in the right direction. Let us not look to our citizens in towns with rail tracks across this country and simply shrug our shoulders. Let's instead say, we know we have a major problem, and we are going to be diligent and aggressive in solving it.